Okay, so here we are on the second day of this retreat. A word of thanks to the folks supporting it. That would be Johanna, prior to and now during, very much so. Thank you, Johanna. Thank you, Bernd, for leading the early morning sit from Germany. It's lovely to have your presence. Thank you, Shanna, for the movement you've been leading us in. Thank you very much to Valerie for supporting all of us in many ways, including just a most profound talk yesterday. And this afternoon, Joe and Gudrun in the evening. Thank you so much. Did I forget anybody? Hope not. Yeah, so just taking a moment to arrive here. Welcome everybody who's just hopped on for the talk. We're going to continue this exploration into the wild world of Koans. And we're going to be looking at another Koan today from the Gateless Gate. Actually also with Master Joshu, Zhao, who we were sitting with yesterday. But I thought first, I just want to kind of sort of wind back a bit and just sort of, I suppose in a sense, just sort of remind myself and remind all of us what we're really up to here, doing a retreat like this as part of a path of training and practice. Why do any of this, really? And I thought I would just dare to invoke two kind of key notions that are perhaps behind all of this, and just briefly speak to them, and they would be wisdom and compassion, which in some schools of Buddhism, traditions of Buddhism, these two are called the two wings of practice, wisdom and compassion. And I believe Thich Nhat Hanh sometimes spoke this way. So what is wisdom? Well, as somebody who has no claim on wisdom at all, I believe that we could say, from other great teachers, I hope I'm not misunderstanding this much, that wisdom might be clearly understanding suffering and its causes. Perhaps a path of wisdom is sort of ever more deeply understanding suffering and its causes. And then what would compassion be? Again, as somebody who has no claim really to speak to this subject, what I learn from others is that perhaps compassion is a clear commitment to doing one's best to free beings from suffering. A clear commitment to doing what one can to reduce, even maybe liberate from suffering. Reduce suffering and liberate beings from suffering. That as a deepening commitment that may become a kind of sort of infinite commitment of some kind, because it's probably an infinite task. And the two, are so closely linked, really, that the more we understand suffering, the more we may understand its causes, and the more we may then want to commit ourselves to the ending of suffering, even though that may be an infinite task. I want to say that somehow it seems to me important not to not to only state it at the highest level, if you see what I mean. Like, you know, I've vowed thousands of times in Zendos to, you know, free all beings from suffering. But actually, and that's, I think there's nothing wrong with having a lofty intention like that, but an aspiration like that. But I think also just having it really more immediate, like really checking in myself, is all of me really engaged in that? Are there in fact still, you know, little gusts and drives, sort of, I don't know, little eddies within me that aren't, you know, that maybe aren't 100% committed to that. Maybe even, you know, if I really look deeply, could I actually say that now and then I'm not really, there are sort of elements in me could still be caught by, you know, uncharitable wishes or unkindness. And how much am I wedded to an image of myself that is a good one? And I want to see myself in a good light, and I want others to see me in a good light, to the extent that I blind myself to times when really there are little impulses of unkindness, or at least not of manifest kindness. And am I open to that? And would that, in fact, be a step forward on the path of wisdom, if I were more open to seeing that I, too, can contain unkindness? Is that actually, you know, a greater kindness, to be able to say, I can be unkind at times, or I can hopefully maybe act less on those impulses, but those impulses can still arise? Would that be more of wisdom, if you see what I mean, than rather than saying, I'm fully committed to compassion and kindness and the freedom of freeing all beings from suffering? You know, if I just hold that up as a kind of blanket target that I'm really identified with, and that's how I see myself, and that's how I want others to see me, whatever, maybe that's not as wise as being able to say, wow, sometimes less than perfectly kind impulses still arise in me from time to time. And I'm going to be large enough to host them too, wide enough to host them too. And I'm thinking a little bit here of Thich Nhat Hanh's amazing poem. Is it Call Me by My Name, My True Name, or something, in which he acknowledges that he has been and is including in himself all kinds of cruelty and unkindness and suffering, yes, too. And that sort of capaciousness seems to be part of his ongoing legacy, that we don't have to be too narrow and sort of tight and over-identified with the good, that actually a greater goodness is to host all of it, all the suffering and what causes suffering. And I don't know if I'm being clear. I hope I am somewhat. Anyway, I'm sort of saying this because I'm thinking of Thich Nhat Hanh quite a bit, as many of us might be. I was lucky enough to get to two of his centers actually over the years. Many years ago, when I was 30, in fact, I was in Plum Village in France, his sort of home base, and I can't remember whether he had it there, but on the altar in Deer Park in California, he didn't have at least when I went there, like 9 years ago, I think now, when I was in Deer Park, on the altar in the massive Dharma Ocean Hall that could, I don't know, seat, I don't know, it was a converted, I think it must have been a converted kind of aircraft hangar, because Deer Park, I believe, was some sort of military base that they bought. that had a lot of space, it had a lot of accommodation, being that kind of a place, and they converted it from its prior mission to Thich Nhat Hanh's mission of ending suffering. And on its altar, in the largest hall, where you think there might be some grand Buddha statue, no, there was a calligraphy in English that just said, "This is it." In the Holy of Holies, so to speak, right on the altar, which was, of course, just a simple bench, really. This simple calligraphy that I guess he had done, and which, I mean, frankly, it didn't strike me as a particularly elegant, beautiful calligraphy either. It's just a very nice, simple calligraphy saying, "This is it. This is it." I find that a very powerful and even moving sort of reminder of what this practice is all about. It begins, and Thich Nhat Hanh said this again and again, it's all about mindfulness. What is mindfulness? It's being present now to the only life we have, which is this. It's tempting to say this moment, but I think the word moment can almost become a concept. It's this. So he called it the miracle of mindfulness. Or maybe we can say the miracle of presence, or the miracle of this. This is it. Don't be searching for anything else. This is it. If Buddha, the awakened one, if it sort of means anything really relevant, yes, it's an example of a committed practitioner, of course, for sure, historically. But it's also like this, this cannot be found anywhere but here, this. So this whole sort of training program, if we could dare call it that, isn't really one, because it's only this now. Because in a certain sense there isn't anything else. Now, where do koans, which after all are little records of things that happened, things that were said far away and long ago, not here, not now, expressly, we talk about Joshu, Jiaozhou, and his sort of great iconic archetypal life, this young man on his quest for what? For something, some different understanding of existing, of being. What is it to live? What is it to be? What is this life? And who am I? Maybe he was sort of driven by these things. I don't know that we really know, but anyway, he apparently was driven to pursue the great search of a human life, Went to Nansen's monastery, and apparently fairly early on, I don't know really exactly, but when he was a youngish practitioner, was graced by a great blow hit him, and somehow his sense of self fell away. He discovered what? Well, Thich Nhat Hanh used to call it interbeing. That things aren't exactly interconnected. That's not Yes, they're interconnected. We can conceptualize it that way, but it's more than that. Things inter-are, he used to say. Many of you know this. This was his second great sort of teaching point. First, the mindfulness, this. Secondly, all things are together. Things aren't separately. They are together. They inter-are. Nothing exists independently. Again, we can get that conceptually, but this practice is about getting it experientially. That not only you yourself, but everything you experience is one, we could say fabric, but that still suggests it's a weaving of somehow separate but connected things, and that's not yet getting to it. The blow that hit Joshu as a young man was that he and all things were one, one reality. Now, that was his discovery, but then he trains for another, 30, 40 years with his teacher Nansen. And then at the end of all of that, he goes off on a kind of pilgrimage for 20 years. It's often translated as a pilgrimage. The word, I think, is angya in Japanese, which is a kind of phase that Zen practitioners of old, and some, I think, today still, would go into at a certain point when perhaps the teacher or the place of training sort of thought it was right. They would go off and entrust themselves to wandering, and they would say, follow their toes, go with the wind, flow like water. So it wasn't pilgrimage quite in the sense that we in the West know it, where there's a site that we set our eyes on and go toward, some holy site, some sacred site, some place that has some special significance. We go to that place. I mean, I think that's a very beautiful thing, by the way, to allow our lives to kind of pause and to instead dedicate our direction, dedicate our impulses, dedicate ourselves to something sort of beyond, something that isn't in the everyday weave, driven by everyday impulses, but is sort of beyond that. We're going to go toward that, and we're going to excerpt ourselves from the ordinary stream of our life and do that. Go to Santiago, or walk the Pilgrim's Way. Of course, there's sites all over the place. In New Mexico, there's Chimayo every year at Easter time. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people wend their way up to the little mountain town of Chimayo with its magical healing dirt, in a well, a pit of dirt. People get little spoons of it they can take home, and there was a vision of the Virgin in the early 19th century in a field near Chimayo, and became a pilgrimage site. But having whatever the framing, whatever the context, the fact that we're prepared to go, in the direction of something outside ourselves, outside our life, beyond our normal way of living, is a beautiful thing. And perhaps in a sense we could say a path of practice is a kind of pilgrimage. It's precisely that. It's trusting that there's sort of there's more than I commonly know, commonly see. And I'm going to dedicate some time to that. How beautiful. And in coming back to the Zen pilgrimage, it's sort of obviously rubs shoulders with that, has echoes of that. but it doesn't have the destination. It's the wandering itself is the pilgrimage. It's an open pilgrimage. It's a recognition, perhaps, that each step is already the destination. Coming back to that more and more. Coming back to this step, coming back to this. That this is where we find our seat, our centeredness, our life. This is also where we find Thich Nhat Hanh's interbeing. It's only here that that can be found. Actually, I want to read a little poem. This is from a book called The First Free Women, Poems of the Early Buddhist Nuns. It's a book deep in the Theravada tradition, early Buddhism. And the Tathagata, I think is its name in Pali. Little beautiful poems of the path to awakening by these early nuns. Here's this one by Vijaya. When everyone else was meditating, I'd be outside circling the hall. Finally, I went to confess. I'm hopeless, I said. The elder nun smiled. Just keep going, she said. Nothing stays in orbit forever. If this circling is all you have, why not make this circling your home? I did as she told me and went on circling the hall. If you find yourself partly in and partly out, if you find yourself drawn to this path and also drawing away, I can assure you, you're in good company. Just keep going. Sometimes the most direct path isn't a straight line. So this circling itself, walking around and around what I think is the seat I should be on, what I think is the sort of center I should be trying to find. What if the trying to find is the center? What if you're already there? Now this is a little koan hint. See, koans they're weird. They are weird, I'm afraid. In terms of where they fit into sort of Buddhist practice, a life of training, they're weird because, the classic sort of training program in Buddhism is sort of understand suffering and its causes, live less harmfully, and be committed to living less harmfully, and start meditating. And then you go through these stages in meditation. You start to get your mindful awareness together, then you can start to get your absorption, your samadhi together, then you start getting deeper insight into suffering, insight into impermanence, and insight into no self. No things have self, I don't have self. We get little glimpses of freedom from self. And then that can lead to further stages of awakening kind of thing. That's the classic path. The Mahayana Buddhism developed around 2,000 years ago, and it sort of simplified things a little bit, you might say. It started talking about awake nature, awakening to your own awake nature. And you don't actually have to go through those stages to get a hit of that, to get a glimpse of that. You probably have to go through a certain sort of training process that will gradually help you know it more clearly and maybe tip you over into residing in it more clearly and something like that. So Zen is within that context. It says that, it says right from the start, Zen says first of all, you don't have to do any scriptural study. I mean, you might do a little bit to get oriented, but it's not necessary, or that's not where the real teaching is to be found. The real teaching is to be found outside of words, outside of scripture. The real teaching is, in fact, in your own heart. It's finding your own heart. And I don't think it means it in the emotive sense that we associate with the word heart. It doesn't exclude that. It's more like the center of you yourself. That's where you find the teaching of Zen. So with that in mind, every time we are picking up a koan, however much we may get entangled in it mentally, and how much we may get involved in its kind of storyline, actually, I think Valerie spoke to this so beautifully yesterday, the koan is really always, in some ways, inviting another perspective on us ourselves, on what we are, meaning our sense of this moment and being the experiencer of this moment. What is this? Who is this experiencer? That's what we're really sort of called to see with fresh eyes by a koan. Okay, damn, where have I got to? This is all. I'm aware that I haven't actually yet picked up the koan of the day, and if we need to have more time on it tomorrow, we will. But let's go into it now. And I really hope that all this stuff I've been saying has, I hope, sort of prepared a bit of ground for it. Okay, I've been giving talks over about the last, maybe kind of I'm thinking maybe sort of 8-9 months, I'm not exactly sure, something like that, on the Gateless Gate. This classic collection of koans. There are several classic collections of koans, by the way. The Gateless Gate is one, the Blue Cliff Record is another, Book of Serenity is another. And how much do I need to just let you know a little bit of background? Okay, let me just read the koan first and then we'll get to a little bit of background. Okay, I mean, more background on koans themselves. I think I've tried to give a little general practice background, but now koans themselves need a bit too. But here's the case. The way they usually set it up in these books is that each koan, the actual koan itself is known as the case. And then often there's some kind of commentary on the case and some kind of verse that the editor, compiler writes about that particular koan. Okay, so here we go. This is case 11 in this collection, The Gateless Gate. It's called Joshu Examines the Hermit. Joshu went to a hermit's hut and asked, "Anybody in? Anybody in?" The hermit thrust up his fist. Joshu said, "The water is too shallow for a ship to anchor." Thereupon he left. Again, he went to a hermit's hut and asked, "Anybody in? Anybody in?" The hermit, too, thrust up her fist. Joshu said, "Freely you give, freely you take away, freely you kill, freely you give life." He made a profound bow. Okay, that's the end. That's the end. So, just to be clear, he visits these two hermits. He asks them the same question. They both give the same response. And then to one of them he says, "The water's too shallow for a ship to anchor." Which probably sounds like a little bit critical. You're not so deep. I'm not going to stick around, or something like that. And then he leaves. And then to the other one, who's done the same response to his question. He says, maybe it sounds a little enigmatic, but it's praise in Zen. He says, freely you give, freely you take away. Freely you kill, freely you give life. And makes a deep bow. So it's kind of lavish praise. We'll home in on those sentences a little bit shortly. What on earth is going on? What the hell is this all about? And how can it possibly help me? Why would I bother? You know, Thich Nhat Hanh says, this is it, not an event 1200 years ago in central China or wherever this was. Why would I waste my time pondering? Why would I spoil my lovely meditation with a story I don't understand? Why bother? An enigmatic, weird, sort of senseless, boring story. It's not a good story. It's just a inscrutable little anecdote. Why bother with it? Well, okay, so that's what I have to try to respond to try to sort of make us all feel it's actually worth giving our precious meditative attention to this strange little story, allowing our whatever meditative absorption we may be developing to help us absorb in or be absorbed by this story. It has, 2 or 3 key sort of points. Let me just, again, I want to just step back a moment. First of all, Joshu, at this time, is on that phase of his life where he was on quote-unquote pilgrimage. That's to say, wandering around China, kind of mostly visiting practitioners of Chan, of Zen, visiting masters with monasteries, visiting hermits living on their own. He's like a wandering hermit himself, not in an isolated place, but kind of a drifter on his own, floating from place to place. It's a kind of non-stationary hermit life, so to speak. What's the purpose? Well, obviously, it's Zen, so it probably doesn't have a purpose. But in a sense, you could say maybe it is the ever unfolding sort of clarification of reality, getting more and more sort of clearly being this, where all is met, all is found, this, the sort of very fulfillment of, God, I want to say the universe is this. The fulfillment of all is this. There is no further fulfillment than this, residing in this more and more. Maybe he's drifting as this, and every time he can, he wants to learn and get ever sort of, we use the word clearer, but it's not necessarily very clear what clear means, actually. But let's call it this, being this, getting more and more thoroughly this. But also, if he can help, he'll help. He makes that commitment, by the way. When he starts out on his pilgrimage, he says, if I meet a 100-year-old person who wants to learn from me, I'll do what I can to help guide them. If I meet a 7-year-old child who can teach me, I will learn from them. Just completely open, this kind of through way of the Dharma, that there's nobody sort of holding the teaching or something. You know, I know I'm sitting here offering this talk, but I'm learning, and you know, I can't claim anything more than that. I'm trying to learn, and you know, the fact that I'm entrusted by you and by, you know, the lineage that I'm part of with offering sort of some guidance the best I can. You know, that's just all part of the learning. And man, I wish I could be a better guide. I'm always hoping there's time to get better at it, and more helpful. But still, anyway, here we are. He's in this sort of infinite unfolding, infinite learning, drifting. Hermit, master, whatever. So he meets these two hermits. Apparently, they're sitting in their little, probably grass huts or thatch huts. And it seems like he can sort of see them because, you know, he doesn't sort of knock on the door and the door opens. It's like somehow they're in some simple abode where obviously they can already see each other. And yet he says, anybody in? Anybody in? Well, we're actually, you know, and they respond. They don't just say, yeah, here I am, you know, would you like a cup of tea or something? They just hold up their fist. So his question is actually kind of a deep one. It's not just an everyday greeting. It's an invitation. Invitation to sort of share something. What? Meet in some way. What way? The Koan way. Koan way. And what is that? It's where all things meet in the heart of you. It's where there is no separateness. It's where all things are. All things are one thing. And yet at the same time, each thing is perfectly itself. Perfectly, completely itself. Anybody in. Anybody in. I mean, you know, if it's a deep Dharma question, a deep Dharma invitation, it could mean, you know, have you seen through the entanglements, the entangled attachments to your sense of being a separate entity? Is there somebody still floating around, leading you by the nose with wants and with desires and aversions and greed and fears and irritations and frustrations? Is there somebody still leading you around with those? Or have you somehow seen through them and that, to some extent at least? Is there anybody in? Could be a question like that. Yamada Koan, in his commentary on this koan, he says, there's another meaning in these words, which is anything here? If there's anything here, show me. And that might be a kind of invitation to, well, sort of awakening. Show me Buddha nature, awake nature. Is awake nature here? If it is, show me. You know, have you seen through? Could be. But whichever it is, that both hermits give this wonderful response. They don't get caught by anything, it seems. They just hold up a fist. They seem really, really wonderful, free. Having seen through the entanglements at the root of suffering, the attachments, the threads, those threads we heard about from Valerie yesterday. They've plucked that last thread. I don't know. I mean, I'm just guessing, but it seems like a pretty beautiful response to me. Just holding up. What a way to go. Yeah. Strange question. Strange response. Beautiful response. Simple. This. What are they showing? We can ask ourselves, what is this fist? There's a famous koan of, the master who's, anything he's asked about Zen, he just holds up one finger. Gute. Famous koan. Sort of maybe similar here. Anybody in? Here's the answer. Koans are about, this interbeing thing, the oneness and the emptiness that underlies that as well. But they're also about this. Every koan tends to have a thing in it. A thing, a fist, a finger, a beard, a thing. Because actually, we can take them on different levels. One level is that we sit with the thing and we discover that the thing is actually somehow sort of part of everything, and so are we. So it can give us that great liberative experience. Every koan can do that. But they're not only that, they're sort of, because there's a sort of, maybe we could say a further sort of step or something where we're not just cast off into empty oneness, and that's the answer. It's not. Of course it's not, because we're human beings. We're living in this world, and if our project is understanding suffering and its causes, and doing what we can to alleviate and give freedom from suffering for all, including ourselves and others near us, if that's our project, we can't sort of just, get blown wide open and that's the end of it. No. So every koan is about this wonder of, the real situation, I want to say, where it's not either a thing or empty oneness. It's both. It's both. It's both. That's what we're going to have to be looking at tomorrow, because I don't want to keep you any longer. And there's a little bit further, I think, that I want to go in this koan. So, but I don't want to keep talking longer for you guys' sake right now. So let's hit pause. Okay. So, just to close, let me please share one more poem with you from the Therigatha. I really love this koan. I don't know that in this poem, I don't know that I fully understand it, but I absolutely love it. It's by Abhaya, fearless. Abhaya, fearless. So sit, as we continue our sitting, the koan that we're just looking at, don't sort of fret it or work with it or anything. If it floats in, if the fist floats in, lofts itself up in your mind, fine, let it do so. If the question, anybody in, comes up in your mind, fine, let it do so. But don't try to sort of work with the koan in any way. Just carry on with whatever your practice is. And if you're not sure, then follow the breath. And if you want, add the little word this now and then, or the little word what is this? The little phrase, what is this? Okay. So that's what we're going to be doing. But listen to this beautiful short poem, and let's see how this helps us. This body you carry around is like a small child, always wanting something. Over the years, body and mind have gotten a little tangled up, haven't they? When one is hungry, the other eats. When one is sad, the other cries. Look closely. Is there a narrow valley where one ends and the other begins? So just recapping. Body you carry around, always wanting something. And over the years, body and mind have got a bit tangled up, haven't they? When mind, I guess, is hungry, body eats. When mind feels sad, body cries. Look closely. Is there a narrow valley where one ends and the other begins? Is there a separation between body and mind?